Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 2 of our story. Carol knew Katie had made a justifiable, rather valid point, but her considerate best friend's words were rather like flour going through a sieve, for she paid no heed to them. Carol was resolutely determined that no one was going to disrupt her plans. She intended to get assiduously busy with the housework. When she was entertaining guests, things had to be so-so, and no one was more important in her eyes than her son's future wife. The chores needed doing. There was no time like the present. She would proceed by doing the outside windows first. They hadn't been polished in many years, she was loath to admit. The upstairs windows were a laborious challenge that would almost certainly require the diligent, unflagging services of a professional window cleaner. There was no way on God's earth she was going to courageously attempt to get up that wobbly, precarious ladder, risking life and limb to clean those windows, which she was sure were filthy dirty. With her crippling fear of heights, that just was not going to happen. Some of the chores would require scrupulous delegation as far as she was concerned. Before long she was sedulously polishing the windows at the front of the house, until they sparkled and gleamed like crystal that had been washed in a dishwasher. She was surprised how much she was actually enjoying the job. It was almost meditational, as it helped her mind to begin to relax. That was when she observed Clayton Harrington standing at the front doorstep of his house that was directly opposite her own home. Clayton Harrington was in his 80s, but the look he was giving Carol this morning was so vague, as if he was looking right through her, like a clear pane of glass, almost as if he hadn't even seen her at all. Clayton Harrington was a quiet, unassuming man who lived a hermetic kind of existence. He never really got involved with the locals in the community, but kept himself to himself. The locals respected his privacy, because if you rubbed him up the wrong way by disturbing his peace, he could potentially become disagreeably fractious and rather crabby. They knew that from bitter experience. But he was one of those enigmatic people that literally seesawed from being jovial to becoming slightly irritable at times. But if he was out and about on this morning, Carol suspected he was probably in a good mood. She understood the elderly man more than most. Her husband had been an introvert, and certainly if he had never married, she suspected Christopher might have been rather crotchety, not dissimilar to Clayton, especially if he'd lived alone like Mr. Harrington did. So she liked to look out for the man. She waved at Mr. Harrington, but he just stood there gawking at her gormlessly, with an impassive, somewhat expressionless look on his face. Was he all right, Carol wondered? She would probably be wise to check up on the man. There was something about the deadpan way he was staring at her that seemed profoundly off. It unsettled her. She hurriedly crossed the road to the other side, walking over to Clayton, who was still staring into space rather blankly. She greeted the elderly man with a warm, friendly smile. "How are you doing, Clayton, this morning? It's so good to see you. Such a lovely day, isn't it? Perfect weather. Absolutely perfect." Clayton's eyes swiveled around in her direction, and he said curtly, "Who are you? What do you want? What are you doing on my property? I don't welcome intruders here. Why don't you just go away and leave me alone, you silly woman?" Carol was taken aback by Clayton's brusque, rather clipped tone of voice. He had never behaved like this to her before. He normally had impeccable manners and could be charming, even though he was caustically rude sometimes to the kids in the neighbourhood, if they deliberately set out to annoy him by throwing a ball yards away from his property, or allowing their dogs to run amok over his yard and dishevel his perfect flower beds. "It's me, Clayton. You know, Carol from over the road, Carol Huberger. I live at the house opposite to yours. We've known each other for years. I'm not a stranger to you, Clayton." Clayton fixed his steely eyes on Carol. "Why are you saying this to me? Talking such nonsense?
What are you doing here? I don't even know who you are. I haven't seen you before a day in my life, so don't pretend to know me," he said abrasively. "Now get off my premises, will you, before I call the police?"
Carol's smile slipped from her face, and she very nearly walked away, but she glanced over her shoulders to look at Mr. Harrington again, and the vacuous, lame-brained look had vanished from his face, almost as if it had never been there at all, and then he appeared to be smiling brightly at Carol, as if the awkwardly thorny moment that had transpired between them had never existed at all.
"Hello, Carol! It's good to see you," said Clayton. "What a lovely morning it is this morning. Look at the sky. It's a perfect shade of blue, just like a bluebell, my favourite flower. It's going to be sunny, isn't it? What are you doing up and about on this bright early day like this? By the looks of things, you're a busy bee this morning."
Carol stared at Clayton incredulously, almost as if he was a ghost, as the change in his demeanour that had shifted so quickly was dramatic. Carol's smile bounced back on her face. "Yes, it's a perfectly lovely day, isn't it, Clayton? Really, really lovely. There isn't a cloud in sight. I like it that way. But there's no guarantee, of course, it's not going to remain like this, because the weather forecast was predicting rain. But while it's bright and sunny, I'm going to get as much stuff done as possible. If you must know, I'm attempting at cleaning the windows. I haven't touched them for many years. But once in a while one is driven to address the things one has overlooked for many years, like I am now."
"Cleaning the windows, are you?" chuckled Clayton. "If you forgive me for saying so, Carol, but I've never seen you clean your windows before. As you say, what on earth has brought on this sudden burst of inspiration? I hope it's infectious, like a deadly disease, because if it is, I want to be afflicted with it. My windows could well do with a good cleaning, but unfortunately I'm getting lazier these days. Things take longer to do, you know. When you get older, you know, Carol, physical exertion can be extremely costly on these tired legs of mine, and it takes a lot longer to do anything. Now, when I was in my 20s, it was a whole nother story. You don't realize how good you have it then. I cleaned people's windows for pocket money, you know, Carol. I was quite nimble back in the day, even if I say so myself. I could get up into all those awkward nooks and crannies. So, what's brought on this sudden burst of inspiration, if you don't mind my asking?"
Carol sighed. "Well, I'm cleaning those wretched windows, Clayton, for very good reason, if you must know. Like you, I would so much rather be putting my feet up. My son is getting married," she said, shaking out the washcloth in her hands. "The windows are absolutely filthy, and I want to make a good impression on my son's fiancée. I've never met her before, you see, Clayton. My son is a dark horse. I didn't even know she existed, but I want the house to shine like a new pin when she arrives here. My mother always used to say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. They're coming to visit me next weekend, you see."
"Lathan? Getting married? It can't be,"
said Clayton, letting out an amazed whistle and shaking his head.
"Why, only the other day that tiny tot of a boy was kicking around a ball mischievously on the street with all the other kids, and I was telling him off for making too much of a noise, and now you're telling me he's tying the knot? How extraordinary. I hate to say this to you, Carol, but it means one thing for me. I'm getting very old. There is no denying it now. When you see the kids in your neighbourhood grow up and have children of their own, you feel as if you've been left behind, if you know what I mean."
Carol nodded her head in agreement. "Oh, I do. Tell me about it. I'm also feeling old. It seems like only the other day I was walking him down this very street in a stroller. They grow up so fast, don't they?"
"Who's the lucky lady?" asked Clayton. "She certainly snagged for herself a good boy. She must be an excellent judge of character. Your Lathan is a nice lad, and good-looking too, if I might say so."
"Her name is Debbie Whitechapel, would you believe? Isn't that an interesting name?"
"Debbie Whitechapel," said Clayton, rolling the name on his tongue. "An interesting name indeed. Now, if you will forgive me, Carol, there are some dishes that need attending, that I've left in the kitchen sink, and while I've got a spurt of energy, I better do them now. Who knows, maybe your industriousness is rubbing off on me. It seems to me, Carol, maybe you are infectious after all. If I hang around you too much, the next thing I know I'll believe I'm 20 again, and be attempting to climb high ladders to reach the more treacherous windows in my home to clean. And we can't have that, can we?"
"You wish," chuckled Carol teasingly. "Like that's ever going to happen in a month of Sundays." She bid Mr. Harrington farewell, crossing the road to the other side, to continue with cleaning the windows. She wiped the beads of perspiration away from her face, and asked herself if the first part of her conversation with Clayton Harrington had actually really happened. "I wonder if he's losing his mind," she thought privately. "I mean, he was so poker-faced and inscrutable. The way he was looking right through me, in the beginning when we first spoke, was super weird. And then he claimed he didn't know me. I'm wondering if he's developing a touch of Alzheimer's or dementia." Carol had Clayton's nephew's phone number available at hand, should she need to phone him in an emergency situation. But Levi Harrington lived far away in Juneau in Alaska. It didn't seem right to worry him about his uncle's strange behaviour, especially if it had been so fleeting. Maybe she'd got him in a bad moment, when his mind was 100 miles away. He was possibly just daydreaming, and I startled him, she persuaded herself. It was probably absolutely nothing. Levi had always asked Carol to keep a careful watch out on his uncle for him.
"I'm all he's got, Carol. All he's got in the entire world," he had told her. "Everybody else in my family want nothing to do with him. They're estranged from him. It is a pity, but it is what it is. Some of my family, I am afraid, have got awfully long memories. They don't forgive easily. And let's just say he's not on their Christmas card list. I'm the only member of the family that looks out for Clayton. He's getting on in age these days, but remains fiercely independent. But there may come a time he needs help, and when that happens I want to be there for him. So I would appreciate it greatly, Carol, if you would give me a call so that I could make arrangements when that happens. I feel certain the day will one day arrive when my uncle cannot manage on his own."
"But of course," Carol had assured him. "I'll do anything to help." Carol glanced towards Clayton Harrington's house, shaking her head sadly. She decided she would keep a steady eye on him from now on, and if he was showing signs of Alzheimer's disease, she'd have to contact Levi Harrington. But getting in touch with him now might be a foolish, rather futile endeavour. Maybe Clayton had been overtired this morning. I mean, he looked so disorientated and confused, but he had suddenly bounced out of his disengaged state, and that was when he recognised Carol. So he was still compos mentis as far as she was concerned. Maybe there really was nothing to worry about after all. Debbie Whitechapel twisted her fingers rather nervously as she sat next to her fiancé Lathan in the passenger-side front seat of the white Hyundai that they had both hired for their 3-day stay at Lathan's mother's house.
"What is wrong, sweet pea? You look rather troubled," asked Lathan, reaching out affectionately to squeeze his fiancée's hand. "You're nervous, aren't you? Why, I believe you're trembling. That's ridiculous. You shouldn't be in such a state. You're meeting my mother, for goodness sake. You're not going to the dentist for an appointment."
"Damn right I'm nervous, Lathan. I'm terrified. That's a better way to actually put it. I'm so worried your mother won't like me. I've seen so many of those mother-in-law movies on television, where all hell breaks loose when the mother-in-law finally meets her husband's new wife-to-be. And I don't want their stories to be mine. I couldn't bear it if that were to happen."
"My mother's not like that. You're worrying about nothing. You will like her when you meet her. I'm sure she will love the bones of you. That's if she's got any sense, of course."
"You don't know that for sure, Lathan. You're her only son, Mothers can be so protective towards their boys, and only children, well, they're the very worst. Everybody knows that. What if she doesn't like me, Lathan? I'm being deadly serious."
Lathan chuckled, as if he thought the very idea of anybody not liking Debbie was hilariously funny.
"What are you laughing at, Lathan?" asked Debbie, making a face. "It's not funny. I don't like it when you laugh at me. You make me feel awfully silly."
"You silly? Never. I'm laughing because I've never known you not to get on with anyone. Everybody likes you. You've got the gift of the gab, haven't you? With people, I mean. Sometimes I wish I'd had your social skills. They're enviable. People naturally warm to you. I can't say the same about myself. I'm a lot like my father in that regard. My late father, I mean. He was exactly like me. Very awkward in social situations."
"You're making it sound as if I'm a social butterfly. I'm anything but. I'm just concerned, Lathan. I'm concerned about the way I look today. Do you think I'm appropriately dressed?" asked Debbie, looking down at the white frock with its yellow daisy pattern that she was wearing, with a degree of trepidation on her face. "I knew wearing jeans was an absolute no-no. It was out of the question. You can't possibly wear jeans when you're first meeting your soon-to-be mother-in-law. I had to wear something a little smarter. But I'm wondering if this sundress that I'm wearing is a little bit on the casual side. What do you think, Lathan?"
"You look absolutely beautiful. That's what I think," said Lathan, squeezing his fiancée's hand yet again. "As far as I'm concerned, you could wear a sack over your head, and you would still look perfect. You can't say that for many people, can you?"
"To you, maybe," said Debbie, rolling her eyes in the back of her head in exasperation. "But you're very biased when it comes to me. I doubt your mother would approve if I arrived at her house wearing a sack over my head." She giggled. "You never talked about your mother, Lathan. Not much. I mean, what does she actually look like?"
"Well, I think she looks a bit like Shirley MacLaine. But a younger Shirley MacLaine, if you know what I mean. I remember thinking that when I watched a programme with her in it once, that she was a dead ringer for my mother."
"You do? You think your mother looks like Shirley MacLaine? You've got to be kidding me. Is this a joke or something?"
"No, I'm not kidding, nor am I joking. I think she does look a little bit like Shirley MacLaine. The short reddish hair, the fair skin, the blue eyes, that kind of thing. That's my mother for you in a nutshell."
"Oh, no, I can't believe you're telling me this. That means she's terribly posh. Shirley MacLaine, she played a role in a movie as a mother-in-law once. I seem to remember that she rarely looked down on her daughter-in-law, as the lady in question did not come from the same upper-crust background as she did. The poor girl was a fish out of water in that environment. It was too terrible for words."
"All right, I will admit that my mother sounds posh. She speaks well. She's well educated, that's all. But she's not remotely condescending in the least, if that's what you're worried about. And everybody does like her."
Debbie pulled a sceptical face. "I wish you hadn't told me this, Lathan, that your mother is a dead ringer for Shirley MacLaine. Now I'm more nervous than I was before. I wish to God I hadn't worn this pitiful sundress. What was I thinking? I shouldn't have listened to you. I should have dressed smarter. Something designer, perhaps. That would have been better. I have a Ralph Lauren dress my dad bought me for my sister's wedding. I should have worn that, shouldn't I? Do you know, Lathan, in that movie, Shirley MacLaine was very condescending to her daughter-in-law. Supposing your mother is exactly the same with me. Oh, my God! Why did I agree to come on this long weekend with you? I knew it was a mistake. I just knew it. I'm never going to be good enough for your mother. I come from a simple, very humble background, with 3 brothers and 2 sisters. I can't think your mother will be remotely impressed by that."
"You have to meet my mother at some point, Debbie. You're about to become my wife. It would be incredibly odd if I didn't introduce you to my mother before we got married. I've met your parents. Now it's your turn to meet my mother. And I promise you this, you are going to like her. She's probably more nervous about meeting you than you are about meeting her, if I know my mother."
Debbie raised a hand in resignation. All right. You make a valid point there. but I still doubt that she's nervous about meeting me. What kind of clothes does your mother wear?"
"Is this the third degree or something?" asked Lathan, rolling his eyes in amusement. "Honestly, Debbie, you will be meeting my mother in any minute. You'll see how she dresses for yourself. You'll be only working yourself into a lather if you keep thinking like this."
"I need to know, Lathan. I'm being deadly serious. How does your mother dress? It's important for me to know these details. I'm the one that has to meet her for the first time, I'd like to remind you. I need to prepare myself for every eventuality. You don't know what it's like to be a woman, Lathan. We don't think like men do. If we did, our lives would be so much easier. Women compete against each other. Nobody admits it, but it's true. If I thought like a man, I'd probably feel quite happy to rock up at your mother's place in coveralls. But women aren't like men. They can be incredibly judgmental, even if they don't mean to be." Lathan thought about his fiancée's question for a moment.
"Well, I've never thought about how my mother dresses. But let's just say she always looks well presented, I suppose. She has expensive taste in clothes, you know. Quality over quantity, I suppose. She does always wear her Tiffany pearls. Smart pants, I suppose, flowing shirts. You know, that kind of thing."
Debbie groaned. "That's all I needed to hear, Lathan. What will your mother think of this old slip of a dress I'm wearing?" she said, staring down at her dress grimly. "Imagine if she thinks I got it from a charity shop or something." It was clear that Debbie wished she was wearing something infinitely smarter. "Why didn't you tell me all this before, Lathan? You know this kind of stuff is terribly important to me."
"You didn't ask me, sweet pea. I'm not a mind reader, you know. As it is, I talk to you more than I've ever talked to anyone else in my entire life. Usually my vocabulary consists of no more than 2 words, but not with you. Believe me, around other people I'm like a closed book with an ambiguous cover. Nobody knows what I'm really like apart from you. When I was at school I received the shy man's label, and it's marked me for life, like an indelible tattoo. I'm exactly like my father. He was the same, and yet my mother got him to talk behind closed doors. So you have much in common with my mother, more than you realize. An innate ability to open up the oyster shell that won't budge, to get to that pearl."
"Well, I hope you're right, Lathan. I really, really want her to like me. I'll be gutted if she doesn't like me. I mean, when you marry someone, you marry their entire family, do you not? I mean, if we have kids one day, it's incredibly important for me that they like their grandmother. What about your mother's house? What is that like? Oh, don't tell me it's posh. Please don't tell me it's pretentious. I'll die if it's pretentious. And furthermore, I hate pretentious houses with a passion, like the ones celebrities live in. They're so over the top. The houses you walk in on tiptoes, that you're terrified of soiling the carpets with your shoes, that kind of place. It's not like that, is it?"
"Well, you'll be glad to know my mother's house is not remotely pretentious," chuckled Lathan. "If you must know, it's a 1950s house. My mother is not the neatest person in the world. She's a bit of a hoarder, you see. Although if she heard me say this to you, it would do her nut. The place might be a bit of a mess. My mother likes to do the bare minimum of housework."
"Oh, thank God for that," said Debbie, throwing a hand through her shoulder-length brown bob. "I'm so glad you've said that. Your mother may be human after all. There is hope for me. I don't think Shirley MacLaine would live in anything less than a very opulent, luxurious mansion that sparkles within an inch of its life, if you know what I mean. I'm sure that woman is swaddled in the lap of luxury." Debbie began to breathe a lot easier. She glanced rather nervously out of the passenger side window to admire the prepossessing views from the window. "It's beautiful around here. So beautiful."
"Well, that's Kentucky for you. Very green, verdant landscape, rolling hills, trees, that sort of thing. My mother lives in a neighbourhood surrounded by many trees. There's a lovely footpath running through the side of old Clayton Harrington's house, which is directly opposite my mother's house. There are quite a lot of horse-riding trails through there. So if you fancy horse-riding, we can always hire a couple of horses for a few hours if you like. It might be a fun thing to do. I used to play in those woods extensively as a little boy. Had the time of my life there, I did. You're going to love it, that's for sure.
So I can go running down the trail you're talking about for my morning jog, can I?
Absolutely you can. No doubt about that. You'll like it in those woods. Lots of indigenous wild animals, rabbits bobbing around, birds up in the trees, you know the sort of thing. You'll definitely feel you're in the countryside. And there's a lovely creek in the woods, along with an alpine field full of wild flowers and sculptural rocks. It's terribly pretty.
It sounds perfectly lovely. I just wish I could be excited about it all. I'm just feeling so damned anxious about meeting your mum.
There's no need to be anxious about meeting her. I assure you everything's going to be just fine. Besides, we're almost there, said Lathan, glancing at his fiancée's grimacing face.
In a trice the white Hyundai was rolling down a street, where all the houses looked to be circa 1950s, but most had been renovated in recent years. It was a mix between ranch-style homes and double stories, all with neatly mowed front lawns and manicured hedges, along with pretty assortments of flowers tumbling daintily out of terracotta flower pots in a celebration of summer. It was a warm day. The sky was the colour of a forget-me-not, and the cheerful sun cast its golden light over the houses, so they were washed in a pretty luminescence that only the morning can bring.
"Well, here we are. This is it,"
said Lathan gingerly, pulling up to a red brick driveway to park in front of a pretty, perfectly shaped double-storey house that rather reminded Debbie of the doll's house she had once possessed as a child.
"This is it! This is your mother's house!" she gasped.
"It's beautiful, Lathan, really beautiful, so inviting, so welcoming. It's certainly got curb appeal."
"It is rather lovely, isn't it? It's rather strange being back, if you must know, after all this time. Quite nostalgic, really."
The house was happily nestled in a pretty front yard, overlooking the street with a gleaming blue front door, polished windows that were so clean they sparkled in the morning light. The house looked as if it was freshly painted, and the front yard was absolutely perfect, full of flower beds bursting with pretty blooms. The place oozed incredible charm. Debbie could see some curtains twitch in a downstairs room, as an ambiguous face peered out of the window, and then quite suddenly the front door flew open. A woman came eagerly dashing out of the house, with a warm, sunny smile planted on her face. Lathan was not wrong. His mother was a young version of Shirley MacLaine, and Debbie felt instantly intimidated by the appearance of the woman. She sat in the car, frozen for a moment, her skinny legs buckling beneath her, her heart pounding vigorously in her chest, as she anticipated the reception she might receive from this very impressive-looking woman, who she was praying would not snobbishly look down on her. Carol Huberger did not appear to have a single hair out of place. Judging by the white trousers she was wearing with the gold belt and glitzy gold sandals, along with the ethereal silk floral top that floated around her like the sails on a boat in the wind, it made her look incredibly fashionable. Those clothes certainly did not come cheap. Carol looked stylish and elegant, and Debbie suddenly felt conspicuously dowdy and uncomfortable in her sundress. She really should have been more judicious about what she chose to wear today. First impressions were extremely important. When they climbed out of the car, Carol Huberger had thrown her arms over her son so tightly that for a moment Lathan did not think she'd let go of her hold over him. But finally she did. Carol chuckled as she looked lovingly into Lathan's eyes.
"Oh, you look so handsome, son. It is so good to see you. I've missed you so dreadfully. It's been such a long time since you were last here. Look at you. You look just like your father these days. The likeness is so uncanny."
Carol could not help but run inquiring eyes over Debbie Whitechapel, and she felt only relief when she studied Lathan's fiancé, trying to hide her obvious curiosity. Debbie Whitechapel appeared rather nervous, but Carol thought she looked likeable, and Carol could deal with likeable. She would have liked to have thrown her arms around the young lady to welcome her into the family, but that would be too presumptuous. It was better just to offer her a handshake, which she did, along with a warm, welcoming smile.
"Lovely to meet you, Debbie. I must congratulate you on your engagement to my son. You've obviously got remarkably good taste in men.
It's a delight to finally meet you. I'm very happy for the both of you. Now please do come in." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.